Good day, this is Val Pramana from sunny Brisbane in the land down under of Australia. This episode of the People and Project Podcast is sponsored by the Essentials of Project Management e-Learning by Andy Kaufman, PMP. See the show notes for details on how to get 15 PDUs for a great price. Thanks!
Welcome to the People and Projects Podcast, where you'll find interviews and insights to help you deliver projects and lead teams. You can find us on the web at peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Hi, I'm Andy Kaufman, President of the Institute for Leadership Excellence Development Incorporated. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the People and Projects Podcast. There's no shortage of advice on what it takes to be a high performer, from business books to TED Talks to blog posts and more. But here's a question I'd like you to consider. What does it mean to truly be a high performer? The closing words of Garrison Keillor's monologue are,
"That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, all the children are above average."
I feel that way about, say, resumes and LinkedIn profiles. Everyone, as it turns out, if you're to believe their profile or CV, is a high performer, a proven leader, an accomplished, fill in the blank. We're all above average, it would seem. An example of this just cracks me up. It was a study that found that 93% of Americans surveyed thought they were in the top 50% of driving skills. So in the context of high performance, there's certainly risk that we put ourselves in that category as well, fancying ourselves as higher performing than those around us. So back to the question, what does it mean to be a high performer? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's the topic of today's episode. We're joined by Marc Effron, author of the new book, 8 Steps to High Performance. It's a provocative book that will answer the question of how you can define what a high performer is. Marc will talk about popular advice that just isn't backed up by consistent scientific findings. And more importantly, he'll talk about some of the specific things you and I need to do to raise our performance and the performance of our teams. Hey, quick note, if you hold a certification from the Project Management Institute, you are earning free PDUs every time you listen to the People and Projects Podcast. We have over 110 hours of free content to help you learn how to lead and deliver. So thank you for listening. And if you get value from these episodes, leave a review on iTunes or LinkedIn or give a shout out on social media. It only takes a couple minutes, and every review makes it possible for more people to join in on the learning. Thank you. Okay, let's get to my recent discussion with Marc Effron about his book, 8 Steps to High Performance. We're talking today with Marc about his new book, 8 Steps to High Performance. Marc, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects Podcast.
My pleasure, Andy. Happy to be here.
One of the many things I love about your new book is your relentless commitment to only sharing ideas that have consistent research backing it up. So before we get into some of the meat of your findings, I'd love for you to start out by telling us 2 things. What do you specifically mean when you talk about us becoming high performers? And second, tell us about the approach you used to come up with the 8 steps to help us achieve that definition.
Sure. So my definition of a high performer is that you deliver both performance and behaviors better than 75% of your peers.
Yeah.
And the better than your peers part is important because it reinforces that performance is relative, is not absolute. You're doing a great job is fantastic, but if you're not doing a better job than others, you're not a high performer.
There's a virtual smorgasbord of material to draw from, right? I mean, you can take the shelves of the popular literature, you can go to TED Talks, and yet you didn't just take snippets from each of those, which is a lot of business books these days. So how'd you go about figuring out what are those things that make you 75% better than everyone else?
Yeah, and Andy, my focus has always been on let's start with the science.
Yeah,
and
right.
Not because there's anything particularly cool about the science, but the nice thing is there are a lot of proven facts there. And it seems like the best place to start trying to prove something is what facts do we already know? Yeah. And so I literally started with just a long list of ideas. What do I think is proven to improve individual performance, some of which I already knew from past research and past practice, But then I had a lot of other ideas and just made this very long list. I think I had 21, 22 items. And then I started the very arduous and extremely boring task of going through thousands of academic articles on those topics, trying to figure out, well, how close to true or how close to factual were any of the things on my list. And most of them fell off, and the ones that remained made it into the book.
And some of them might actually help, but there just isn't research to back it up, right?
Yeah, there are things that are proven to be helpful. There are things that are proven to be harmful. And there's that great gray area in the middle where sounds good, but there's just not any science that proves that it's effective. And each of us as consumers of that material needs to figure out what proof point makes sense to them. Some folks are happy just to try stuff, see how it works. Other people want to have a belt and suspenders level of confidence. Whatever your proof point, cool. I love conclusive science as my proof point.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm just going to jump to the end of the book because really that last step is about kind of avoiding the bad advice. And so what are some examples of popular advice that's often doled out these days, but doesn't have that scientific backing that you needed to put it in the book?
Sure. And I've included that chapter very purposefully because it's not only enough to try and spend your time productively to hit your theoretical maximum performance, but also every hour you spend doing something that is proven to be unproductive is a wasted hour you're never going to get back. And there are a lot of opportunities to waste those hours if you follow what is said on some popular TED Talks and then some popular leadership books. And the screen that I use to identify things that either fall into the category of legitimate or not so legitimate, I call it the PURE test. PURE means proven, unique, and realistic. So proven, the academic community in that area kind of agrees that what you are saying is correct. So you're not an outlier. It is a unique area of study. So one of the popular leadership books is something called Grit, and a very popular TED Talk. Well, grit isn't unique. Grit is actually just a part of personality that is extraordinarily well known, and someone decided to relabel it and sell a bunch of books. So it has to be proven, it has to be unique, and then it has to be realistic. The old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is a very reasonable screen to use in science. So the PURE test, proven, unique, and realistic. And there are a number of things I list in the book that don't pass those, two that I like to highlight a lot. One is focusing on your strengths. Now, it is challenging to argue with an organization that has sold millions of, I think 18 million Strength Finder assessments. And if you want to be really good at the exact job that you're in right now, there is nothing wrong with focusing on your strengths. Now, if I say, look, I don't want to move up a level, I don't want to do any other different job, I want to optimize exactly what I do, fantastic. Focus on your strengths. But if you want to do anything else, the science is really clear. You're going to need to display different strengths in different jobs at different levels and different challenges. So if you're only focusing on that one set of strengths, you're ignoring all the other factors that are going to allow you to be successful in other roles. And the research would say most of us have fewer strengths than we think we do, if you define a strength as being in the top 10% of something. And a lot of times the strengths that we have don't align with what our organization needs. So if you want to move up, if you want to grow and develop, actually focusing on the things that aren't your strengths are going to get you there faster. So focusing on your strengths can be a bit of a challenge and certainly isn't proven to develop you any more effectively than anything else. And then another concept, and this is the part of the podcast where your listeners start to get angry at the guest, growth mindset. Growth mindset, the darling of a lot of Silicon Valley. Growth mindset is actually a concept that is proven to work in children. And growth mindset is simply saying if little Mark and little Andy are sitting in the classroom and little Andy thinks he can do a task, and little Mark thinks that he can't do a task, even if they're equally capable, little Andy will do a better job. But if you tell little Mark, hey, Mark, think about the possibility that you can do that task, then little Mark will do better. Proven in children, great technique. Lots of teachers use it. Fantastic. completely not proven in adults, because adult brains are fully formed, adult personalities are fully formed. In many cases, this is what I would call the kick in the butt theory, which is simply, hey, if you simply tried, maybe you could do this. There doesn't need to be much kind of academic proof around that, but this has been dressed up as something that ambitious people have. The challenge is it also overlaps with so many other pieces of science. There's personality wrapped up in that. There's levels of intelligence wrapped up in that. There's even socioeconomic pieces wrapped up in that. If I tell somebody in sub-Saharan Africa, hey, if you just tried harder, you wouldn't be starving, that might not be the advice they need to hear. So I would say, a bit of a long answer, one, focusing on your strengths, again, hasn't been proven to be not true, but certainly not proven to be true. And growth mindset, kind of a relabeling of a bunch of different concepts without a real end in mind. Kind of what's the benefit of that growth mindset?
I've never gone through a growth mindset discussion with somebody and they go, oh, this is so helpful. I have such a fixed mindset.
I do wonder, who are these people who go around in life saying, I can't accomplish anything? They're probably in an institution somewhere, and that's great. Let's get them some good pharmaceuticals and send them on their way.
If there's anything I got out of that one was, if I don't know something, I can say yet after that. And that works well with kids. And I've seen it work well with others. But still, I mean, you take on emotional intelligence and the 10,000 hours. That last chapter, it's just fun. So let's move on here, because your subtitle captures, I think, a meta theme that goes through your book. You say focus on what you can change and ignore the rest. So tell us about the idea of the fixed 50% and the flexible 50%, and how that fits into the whole high performance equation.
I think it is a lot easier to be a high performer when you understand the things that you can control, things that you can't control, and stop worrying about the things you can't control. So the science is really clear that things like our intelligence and our personality are about half inherited from our parents. So you can bless your parents or curse your parents because of that. But you can't change that either of those after about age 18. So those are pretty much fixed. Your socioeconomic background. Maybe you grew up with a silver spoon in your mouth. Maybe you grew up in very challenging economic times. Either way, can't do a darn thing about that at this point. The way that you look. Some people were born attractive. Others of us weren't so much. You can't do a darn thing about any of those. So given, if you're listening to this podcast right now, what can you control? That's the other 50%. So the science would suggest, and this is rough, but about 50% of how we show up at work is based on those fixed areas of intelligence and personality and your socioeconomic background. But that means 50% is controllable by each of us. And hitting that theoretical maximum performance is all about saying, what is controllable by me, and how do I put together an optimum plan to make each of those factors work? And I urge readers in the book, don't stop fighting against the injustices of people who are brought up in a bad socioeconomic background, or the biases that people face in the workplace. These are all injustices that we should all fight against. But given your individual situation right now, you control 50% of how you succeed. What's the plan for that?
That's good. Yeah, I love the challenge in there. Most of the people listening to us, they lead projects and they lead teams. The idea of setting goals is not new, but your first step is not just to set goals, it's to set big goals. So what do high performers do differently when it comes to goals?
And it's interesting, Andy, the concept certainly isn't new. It is amazing how bad people are at this. And I say that based on, I've consulted with hundreds of companies around the world, and these are big, successful organizations and sophisticated, educated managers, but goals are not set well. And so part of it is, even though it's new, most people aren't particularly good at it, even though being good at it doesn't require that much effort. What I find is, what science would say, and what I find in reality, is that just by exercising a few quick tips, folks can dramatically improve the impact of those goals. And it starts with few. So you mentioned kind of big, challenging goals, and that's great, but you can't have 28 big, challenging goals. Not going to happen. but you can probably have three. I'm a big fan of the number three. So my view is each of us probably has three really big things to get done during the year. The challenge is to figure out which are the three that matter most, which three are going to have the most impact on my organization. So getting to a few allows you to get to big. Once I understand what the few most important things are, then I can say, what's the optimal performance I can deliver against those? So now if great would look like I deliver 110% of that target, how would I get to 115% of that target? And not just to set an arbitrary level, but the science is unbelievably clear. In fact, some of the strongest science out there says that we as humans respond to challenge with additional effort. So if Andy says, hey, Mark, jump a foot in the air, I'll give you $1. I jump a foot in the air. If you say, hey, Mark, can you jump 2 feet? I'm going to try and jump 2 feet to get $2. If you say 3 feet, I'll try and jump for $3. I'm only going to stop trying either when I don't see the reward being commensurate. So you say, hey, jump 4 feet. And I say $4. You say, nope, just $3. Say, no, I don't want to do that. Right. Or I'm too physically exhausted to complete the task. So given that we respond as humans to greater challenge with more effort, we should always be setting those bigger goals because it is the easiest way to actually get more performance, both out of ourselves and out of our teams.
And I love the practical advice you give, Mark, on you don't have to just divine this yourself. I mean, you give even specific words you can say to a boss or ideas of cadence of how often you ask. And I want people to read the book to see it, but this is helpful, but I mean, as an idea, but how to execute it sometimes is where books leave us lacking. And there's some very specific ideas on how to do that. And I want to get to the second one too, because one of the ways for us to become higher performers is to get coaching. And, it allows us to do what you talk in the behave to perform, step 2. Now, you talk in the book about how blind we are to our own performance. So what are some practical tips to get useful, actionable insights in how to ramp up our performance?
Sure. Well, let's start first with why don't we normally ask for feedback?
Yeah.
The answer is we don't want to hear it. We all have strong self-images. We think we're pretty darn good. And the last thing we want to do, in fact, our brains work against us doing this. The last thing we want to do is go around saying, hey, what can I get better at? Please dent my ego with your response. So because our brains actually work hard to reinforce our self-image and to reject information that doesn't reinforce that self-image, we're not naturally wired to go around asking for assistance. So the first step in getting better or getting some coaching is to recognize everybody can get better at least one thing. So that starts with the great equalizer. I bet there's one thing Andy can improve. I know there's one thing Mark can improve, and I bet everybody listening to the podcast, there's at least one thing you can improve. That makes it a lot easier for me to go to Andy and say, hey, Andy, on our next podcast, can you give me a suggestion for something that I could do better to be an even more effective guest? Now, that would be called feed forward. Feed forward is a concept that Marshall Goldsmith created. It takes the sting out of getting advice to be better for two reasons. First, I'm asking. It isn't Andy coming to me saying, hey, Mark, if you're ever a guest again, I'd really like if you did X, Y, or Z. I'm asking Andy, hey, I would love to be the best guest possible. What else could I do? And because you're giving me a suggestion that's focused on the future, what you're not doing is conflicting with my ego about things I've done in the past. You're not saying, oh, Mark, you weren't a good guest in the past. You're saying, hey, to be an even better guest, you might want to try X and Y. Now, that might sound like a cute party trick, but there is a ton of psychology that says when information is framed in a way that is about us maximizing our gains, as opposed to hitting our ego, we're going to follow that advice much more closely.
I still won't forget when I told my kids about this, like just a week ago or so. I'm like, man, I'm reading this book. I'm really loving it. And I shared the feedback versus feed forward. I got to say, it's parenting advice too. I mean, they're just like, oh my, that's brilliant. That it's this really simple idea that it's like you said, the brain doesn't get in the way. As I think you say in the book, we are sometimes our own worst enemy. We ask for feedback, but we don't take it because it's not what we wanted to hear. So that whole feed forward idea is absolutely brilliant. 8 Steps to High Performance is filled with insights that they're not going to read in a college textbook, I think it's fair to say. And I'm going to skip forward to the chapter on step 6, to fake it, because I got to guess that this is something you often people are like, what are you talking about, And so tell us what you mean by faking it, and also maybe what you don't mean, and what are some practical, research-backed ways to implement that step?
Sure. And the reason that fake it sounds a little bit controversial is because, especially over the past 5 to 10 years, the fad has been to be authentic or to be genuine. So if the opposite is to be inauthentic or ingenuine, then, why would we want to do that? But the challenge is that being the authentic or genuine us might not be the us that others always need to see. And the science is very clear that good leaders adapt their style to the individual and the situation that they're in. So me thinking that I need to be me in every situation is probably the worst possible strategy. Instead of me saying, who should I be given I'm interacting with this person who has this need? What's going to optimize the outcome? So if we start with the fact that the wonderful, genuine you might not be the perfect individual to show up in every situation, it suggests that sometimes you're going to need to fake a different behavior. And what the science would say is there are a couple of different times in your career when you're almost going to kind of guaranteed to have to fake that behavior to show fundamentally different ways of being a leader. One is that leaders start their careers by emerging. So emerging means that you are getting known in an organization, you are showing off your work. Essentially, you're waving your hand around and saying, hey, somebody pay attention to the good stuff that I'm doing. Yeah. Now, some people are naturally wired to do that. They're going to emerge as leaders quickly. Now, the benefits of emerging are you're well known. People know you. People maybe even like you. And that means you're going to get more opportunities and have stronger relationships in your organization. Now, some people aren't hardwired to do that. Hey, that's embarrassing. Hey, I shouldn't have to raise my hand. Hey, good work speaks for itself. All lovely sentiments. None of them are true. And so if you're going to succeed, you're going to need to emerge. And so that means you might need to fake being somebody who feels comfortable raising their hand in a meeting and saying, hey, I have a different idea. You might need to fake going to your boss and saying, hey, I would love to be a part of that big project. You might need to fake other behaviors that call attention to you, even if they don't feel natural, because that's what's required to emerge. Now, the flip side, being an effective leader. After you emerge, that's great, but then you need to get to a level of effectiveness where you are good at managing others. Now, if you're someone who loves calling attention to yourself and you emerge very successfully, science would say you're going to need to fake being a humble leader. You're going to need to sit on your hands when somebody asks who has a good idea about how to do X. You're going to need to put your hand over your mouth when questions are being asked and you want to answer first. So to both either emerge or to be an effective leader, it may require that you literally fake behaviors that just feel very unnatural to you as a way of both convincing yourself that you can do it, but also convincing others that you're behaving in a way that's appropriate for that stage in your career.
I like it. It's you're not saying lie. You're faking is not, yes, this project's on time when it's not on time. It's not that. But I took it from the book. I have my preferred way of doing things. And that preferred way in this context is probably not going to be what's most effective. And so it is part fake it till you make it. But one of the things I loved about in the book, Mark, you say, for anybody struggling with this, we do it all the time. Right? I mean, what are some ways that somebody, without even realizing it, they're faking it today?
Hey, great answer, Andy. I appreciate that.
Exactly.
Hey, boss, great report. Hey, that was a wonderful presentation you gave. Hey, great tie. We fake it all the time. And it's not because we're liars or we're insincere, but it's simply a way of ingratiating ourselves with others. Now, there's a way of doing that comes off as a blatant suck up. And there are ways of doing that that simply suggest you're recognizing what others do well. So if your boss gives a great presentation, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, that was a brilliant presentation. I would love to hear a couple of tips about how you prepare to do that. Now, that's just genuine. You believe that's right. Now, some people might think, well, if I ask my boss for tips, that's going to feel like sucking up. Well, not your boss, it's not. So a lot of this is, again, us getting out of our own way and doing things that are proven to make us more effective. Yeah. In fact, if you're worried, hey, if I suck up, my boss is going to notice, well, the science is very clear that even when people know that they are actively being flattered, they don't think anything worse of the person flattering them.
Everything inside me wants to say, that was the most brilliant answer I've ever heard, Mark, but I'd be sucking up.
Well, thank you, Andy. You're the best podcaster I've ever worked with.
And when I think it was Pfeffer who said, he goes, even though we know it's flattery, we go, well, Mark doesn't really mean that, but it's mostly true.
Exactly. It is unbelievably powerful. It's also something that many of us are deeply uncomfortable with. Right. Hey, that's political. Yeah. Well, you know what? The people who are effective at it call it relationship building.
Yeah. Actually, that chapter alone is one of the best treatments on organizational politics that I've read in a while. So that chapter alone, worth the price of admission. And, step 7 focuses on the role of committing our body to help us perform at our best. So I'm interested in not necessarily an overview of all that you found, but what surprised you about the research? So what was surprising when it comes to this step? And I'd also be interested in what's something you personally are doing differently because of what you learned.
On my list of 21 or 22 things that I researched, one was diet, one was exercise. Yeah. Now, I went into that almost conclusively thinking, well, of course diet and of course exercise have to contribute to your performance at work. And I could give you 38 reasons why. Turns out if you actually go to the science, nope, they do not. And I'm a gym rat. I spend 4 to 5 days a week, or go to the gym 4 to 5 days a week. And so this hurt my ego a little bit. But the science is really clear. While exercise might keep you healthy and trim and keep your heart in good shape, which contributes to being alive, which is a precursor of high performance, it in no way actually improves your performance at work, except in very minor kind of unique ways. But the big factor that did emerge, is actually a much larger factor than I imagined, was the power of sleep, both quality and quantity. And in the chapter on committing your body to performance, what I talk about is kind of the realities of sleep, because I think the average professional, when they hear things like 8 to 10 hours of sleep in a dark room with no devices beforehand and no pets in the room, and when I'm dead, I guess I'll get a great night's sleep. So in the book, I describe some realistic sleep strategies. So what's a minimum acceptable number based on the science? And again, I'm not a sleep scientist, but we researched 40 different articles on sleep, and it's pretty clear. About 6.5 to 7 hours should be fine for most folks. And the science is clear that 1, caffeine works. 2, if you're in a workplace where you can sneak 1, a 10-minute nap can make up for an hour of missed sleep. Yeah. So a lot of it is kind of understanding what's the minimum acceptable level, but also, hey, if I get a little bit less than that, how do I adjust my behavior so I'm not a kind of a cranky jerk on the day where I get 5 hours instead of 8?
Yeah, it's a really interesting chapter. Let's say a listener's committed to becoming a high performer themselves, but they also want to help people they lead become high performers. And 8 Steps to High Performance, it's filled with coaching advice, as it turns out, as well. So what are a couple highlights you like to share with leaders to help them develop high performers around them?
Probably 2 things I would lead with. One is, and we talked about it a bit earlier, clear high standards. Let's call those goals, kind of clear, big goals. One, because we know that bigger goals deliver bigger results, but also in setting those bigger goals, you're going to help identify who really wants to be a high performer. And I talk about in the first chapter, the high performer's mindset. There is a degree of sacrifice, oftentimes a meaningful sacrifice, involved in being a high performer at work. You can slice your time pie any way you want to, but if you want to be a high performer at work, some other aspect of your life is going to get a smaller slice. So by setting those high goals for your team members, you're going to get a good sense of who actually really wants to be a high performer. And not everybody has to be. It's great if they are, but not everybody has to outperform. But setting those high standards will help you to understand who is more committed to that goal than others. And then one of my favorite tips to recommend, and a lot of my big global clients use this. I think we've counted there now about 10 million people in my clients' companies using this technique. It's called 2+2 coaching.
That was good.
And 2+2 coaching is a way of just radically simplifying something that oftentimes we feel uncomfortable either doing or receiving. 2+2 coaching is as simple as this. You as a manager talk to each of your direct reports for 15 minutes once a quarter. So this is not a big time ask. Once a quarter, 15 minutes with your directs. And you tell them two things in those 15 minutes. You offer 2 comments against their goals. Not 2 comments against every goal, 2 total comments against their goals. It might be, hey, Andy, I noticed that you've distributed your podcast to 50 more locations. That's 10 more locations than we'd agreed to, doing a fantastic job on that. Hey, Andy, on your new TV show, I haven't seen any of your strategic plans around that. Not sure if you're working on them or I just haven't seen them, but you need to pick up the pace on that. So 2 comments on goals, and then 2 feed forward suggestions for how that person can be better going forward. And those can be about behaviors or skills, but 2 things, just like the dialogue we had earlier, that help people to understand what they could do differently in the future to be a higher performer. So 2+2 coaching, radically simple. There is no manager in the world who cannot have a 2+2 coaching conversation. And it hits on the most important things. What are your goals and what are your behaviors, and takes the fear out of the process.
Something else I took out of it that was really helpful for me was the whole 70-20-10. And if you wouldn't mind taking a little bit explaining that, because I think sometimes we don't grow our people by giving them those experiences.
Sure. 70-20-10. That is a ratio. It's somewhere between research and science, depending where you want to draw the line, but let's call it science for now. It's a ratio that says, where do people, or from what engagements do people learn the most? 70 says about 70% of what we learn is from the experiences that we have. So experiences we have at work, it might be a project, it might be a job, it might be interacting with people, but we learn about 70% of what makes us effective professionals through those experiences. 20 refers to interacting with others. Now that might be that we're watching other people perform. It might be that we are getting feedback or coaching, but there's some direct connection with another person that's helping us to learn. And about 10% is formal butt-in-seat classroom training. So 70% experiences, 20% learning from others, about 10% formal learning. And I'll get to the experience piece in a bigger way in just a moment. Some people get a little upset at that 10, and they say, well, man, I spent a lot of money and time and effort on my education. It is incredibly important. I tell folks, I am really, really glad that my personal physician went to medical school. That was a valuable investment of their 10%. But if that's all they had ever done, I would not let them touch me. So even more education is not going to be helpful. The fact that he has practiced for 25 years has made him a very good personal physician. So what we can do as managers to apply that concept is, when you think, hey, I bet that Andy could be even better at his job if, fill in the if with an experience. If he had this experience, he would either learn this capability, this skill, this behavior. Stop defaulting to, I will send them to a class. Classes are lovely. Classes are enjoyable. Classes are sometimes helpful. They are the least effective way of accelerating somebody's development. Big, challenging experiences will grow people faster than anything else that you can do for them. So I would start by thinking through, if I want to make someone better at something, what experience can I give them? And also recognize experience does not mean a job. It could be a project. It could be sitting in the back of the room listening to somebody else's discussion. But what would that experience be that would most accelerate that person's development?
Yeah, it's easy to remember, and it's practical, just like the book. It's just filled with those ideas. So, Marc, as a way to wrap this up, I mean, you're helping organizations around the world improve their ability to become high performers. Of all that you write about and speak about in the topic, what's the most difficult for you personally to follow?
Yeah, that's an easy one. And even when I reread my own book, I cringe a bit on this one, and it is connecting. I am not a good connector. I am an introvert and kind of a non-social introvert, meaning I know how to, so back to the faking, I know how to turn it on when I need to. I'm very good in front of crowds, get paid good money for speeches, but I'm not naturally going to walk into a party and say, isn't this cool? Who can I talk to first? And luckily, things like LinkedIn have been excessively valuable for me, but also recognizing I'm going to need to fake that behavior sometimes, because you don't become you don't sell any books by standing in the back of the room staring at your shoes. Sometimes you actually have to say, what would an extrovert do in this situation, and fake that behavior for a while.
Yeah, that's perfect. For those listening, if you want practical, evidence-based insights on how to accelerate your ability to perform at your best, I strongly recommend you get a copy of Marc Effron's new book, 8 Steps to High Performance. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Marc, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks, Andy. It was a pleasure.
I hope you found that discussion with Marc helpful. Before we wrap up this episode, there are 3 things I'd like to reinforce from Marc's book and this discussion. First of all, this thing of just being a high performer, right? You remember his definition? You deliver performance and behaviors better than 75% of your peers. I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. And he talks in the book, and we didn't really talk about it much during the interview, but he has this idea called this theoretical maximum performance. It's taken from the sports world, but it's an interesting idea for us. What is your theoretical maximum performance? And even though we maybe can't measure it, nearly every one of us are capable of learning more, delivering more. We have the potential, probably more than what we realize. Marc's book is how do we tap into that? And it's not about working more hours necessarily. It's about the behaviors that study after study seem to indicate that these things impact our ability to get closer to our theoretical maximum, our maximizing of our potential. So I have to tell you, the reason why this is so important to me is I see a tendency in myself and others to eventually settle. There's a quote from Roger Dawson that says it this way. He says, "It's a virtue to be content with what we have, but a vice to be content with what we are." He goes on, "Too many people congeal at some point in their lives. They reach a point where they don't want to change anymore. They become content with what they've become, and their belief about their potential congeals like cooking fat getting cold in the bottom of a frying pan." A human mind, he says, is a terrible thing to waste, and it's even more tragic when the mind is one that was successful in the past, but is now congealing in contentment. Okay, so it's not the prettiest of pictures there, and I'll put that quote in the show notes of the episode so you can reflect on it. My question for you is this. Have you started to congeal? Would an honest assessment of your last couple of years of performance show this drive to grow and learn and stretch yourself closer to what is this theoretical maximum? Maybe so. I mean, you're taking the time to further your learning right now. But if not, let this interview with Marc and a reading of his book be a catalyst to get back in the game. How about you and I both aim to get closer to our theoretical maximum performance? Secondly, I'm interested in what you think about that feed forward idea that Marc shared. I personally think it's pretty powerful for the reason that Marc asserted. Feedback has the potential to put people on their defensive, right? To feel shame, but feed forward is something they can work on. I see this sometimes. Well, people, they'll give feedback to somebody, but it's already happened and they can't change what they did, but it turns into shame. Try giving someone some feed forward in the next week. In fact, consider trying Marc's 2x2 coaching model. Remember that? On a regular basis, giving people 2 comments about their goals. And by the way, remember, that's not 2 comments about every goal, just 2 comments about their goals overall, and then 2 feed-forward suggestions about how they can get better. I think it's a simple and easy thing to remember, and I would love to hear from you how it goes. Finally, I'm interested in what you think about Marc's discussion about faking it. I really don't like the implication of the word fake, but the chapter's definitely worth reading It reminded me of what we talked about with Herminia Ibarra back in episode 130 about her book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, and with Kathy Salett back in episode 149 regarding her book, Performance Breakthrough. If faking it seems to be insincere, think of it this way. How do I need to show up in this moment to be most effective? You know, when I lead webinars from home, you would absolutely laugh out loud if you saw what I'm often wearing. I've got a dress shirt on top, but I'm usually in exercise shorts or pajamas on the bottom, right? And further, I've learned that as long as I wear my headset, I don't even have to mess with my hair ahead of time. However, just this last week, I had 7 speaking engagements, including multiple keynotes with audiences as large as over 1,000 people. I gotta tell you, there were no pajama bottoms on those days. I took care of my hair ahead of time. Now, I wasn't faking who I was in front of the large crowds. I was just being appropriate to the situation. And that's ultimately what Marc is getting to. So let's say you have a meeting with some more senior leaders coming up. And in that situation, it might be your nature. I think I need to be more quiet. Maybe you're feeling a bit nervous. I mean, after all, these are the bigwigs, right? These are the important people. I better keep my mouth shut so I don't look bad. Okay? Now, in that meeting, faking it, in Marc's terms, might be conjuring up a confidence that's stronger than what you truly feel inside. So, what does that mean? It could mean walking more confidently in the room than you feel, sitting tall in your chair, perhaps asserting yourself in the meeting by asking a question or responding to a request. Instead of contracting, you assert, and that may require some faking, at least faking in Marc's terms. And if that still feels inauthentic, just remember what Herminia told me. Sometimes we use authenticity as an excuse to not change. You may find yourself significantly agreeing with me, like, yeah, Andy, I'm with you, or no, I still don't agree with you. But if it makes you a bit uncomfortable, I'm actually glad. This is something I really want you to wrestle with. In fact, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Let me know your thoughts and questions about this discussion with Marc. What do you agree with about that faking it? What are you concerned about with that? One way to stay in touch, in addition to email, is to connect on LinkedIn. You can do that at peopleandprojectspodcast.com/LinkedIn, which redirects to my LinkedIn profile. I hear from podcast listeners almost every day, and I would love to hear from you. Thanks.
Good day, this is Val Pramana from sunny Brisbane in the land down under of Australia. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the People and Project podcast. Stay tuned for some outtakes from the episode. Have a great week.
I gotta tell you, there's we'll talk about feed forward, but that was brilliant. I think that derailers thing you have from Hogan, that alone is worth the price of the book. And the ingratiate. We had Jeffrey Pfeffer on back in episode 200, and that whole ingratiate thing is still, I don't know. I buy it, but everything inside me wants to say, no, you're just a suck up, right?
It is, yeah. I love Jeff's stuff on this, and actually, it's funny. I combined the academic stuff from Jeff and the more colloquial stuff from Marshall Goldsmith. Because Marshall, I don't know if you had Marshall on your show. Marshall always tells this great story about who gives you the most love when you come home at night. Kids, or is it your dog? And it's like, why do you love your dog? It's like, your dog sucks up 24/7.
That's good.
Not my quote, it's a Marshall quote, but it's very true. It's sucking up works, and I admit I am horrible at it. In fact, I'm almost the anti-sucker upper, and that limits the routes that you have to go down.
Yeah. So I've only picked a couple of the steps, but I want to assure you that this is a book that I like dog-eared, and I've got more Evernote notes on this book than many in the past. So I am excited about how this book's going to do, and I look forward to helping get the word out.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, and appreciate you having me on the podcast. And how long of responses are ideal? Because I can give you 4 words, a full sentence, paragraph. What's best?
Yeah. Usually what I do is target about 35 minutes once we start rolling. But I got to tell you, if you want to, I don't want you to cut. If you think there's like a really important point that would help someone, go ahead and make it. And so you adjust as you want. One guest told me, they go, because I'll give you nonverbals. I'll go, yeah, but I'm not rushing you. One guy goes, I was wondering if you're rushing me. I'm not rushing you. So I want you to kind of share your heart in this stuff. And so if it goes faster, if it goes longer, we do not have a window we're trying to fit into. Okay.
Perfect. And I tend to be rather succinct, but where it feels like a little more explanation might be helpful, I'll go a bit.
Yeah, and I'll give a follow-up if I think so too, because I'm as excited about your book as you are. and that's not sucking up. I just want to I really... But
it works either way. Even if see, the best people, it doesn't feel like sucking up.
Well, when it's true, it helps too. Right? Now, it depends on the context, but if someone comes up and goes, hey, Mark, what do you do? Like, what's one way that you answer that?
I help the world's largest companies and most ambitious individuals to reach their theoretical maximum performance.
Man, that whole idea, by the way, was I'd never heard it said quite that way. And it doesn't surprise me that Olympic athletes are thinking about that, but it's a good model for us. Yeah,
I stumbled across it, and it kind of is, if you want to optimize a machine and the human mind and body are a machine, okay, how close could I get and how much effort would it take?
Yeah. And even if that maximum, I think you say in the book, is not, it's theoretical, it's not possible, but how close can you get? Yeah, that is I don't know. I just found that really resonated with kind of a model to think about, because it's one thing to say we need to maximize potential, but saying it that way, I think makes it like, oh, wait, what is that max? So, all right, that is a wrap. Hey, you know what? That was great for an introvert. You faked it really well there, man. I just thought I was talking to Tony Robbins there for a second, man.
I have learned over the years. Nobody wants to hear the mumbled. So and again, so much of what I do, I channel my inner Marshall Goldsmith, because Marshall avoided all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, let me give you some feed forward. I think that I'm trying to think of something I ask you to do differently. I can think of some good things, but I can't think of anything from an interview perspective. I think what I would want to do next time is make sure that it's communicated to you the start time, so you didn't have to have the that 1 hour delay thing. So that's something I'll talk with Andrew about to make sure that we're aligned on that.
Not a problem, and actually it gave me time to go through the questions, which I had not seen until I was digging around in Skype. So I think it worked out for the better. I hopefully was I sounded like a better guest because I had a bit of prep time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. How do you, as busy as you are, Mark, how do you develop yourself? I mean, what do you read? What do you listen to? I mean, how do you personally try to stay sharp?
Two things, one purposeful, one just because it's part of my job. Purposefully, this doesn't sound very exciting. I read through all the academic journals that come in on this field. Which shows what an exciting person I am. But that's where the nuggets of gold are. Yeah. And the sharper that I can stay on that, the more confident I feel that when I'm giving people advice, it's the right advice. And I'm pretty serious about this. I hate being wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I try really hard to make sure that I've got my facts buttoned up. So that's just a great way of continually testing your knowledge. And science does change. So it doesn't hurt to say, hey, I actually thought that was once true, or maybe it once was proven true. We found something new. Cool. I'm agnostic around that. I just want to know the facts. The other piece is I'm so fortunate that our company has a great client base, big companies around the world, everywhere from big food, big pharma, big tech, and just interacting with those clients. I learned so much about not only what are the hot workplace issues, what solutions are working, what solutions aren't working. Yeah. It gives me a chance to either confirm some theories or disconfirm others. So that helps keep me in the kind of the real world of here's what folks are struggling with. And I think the big learning for me is most of the things that get airtime in the media around what's happening in HR and with management are driven by authors with agendas. Not by what's really happening at work, because a lot of these, probably a lot of the interviews that you've done with people, the concepts sound interesting, and there are one or two companies who are name brands who are doing it, but in reality, it's unheard. 98% of companies have never heard of it.
Yeah, I love your Like even just your ability to test it in a very big lab. Like whenever I see a study that says, well, we looked at 32 people or whatever, it's like, come on.
My mom and my dog, and they both felt that.
Yeah. Well, it was a very enjoyable read, and I am not sucking up when I say I can't wait to get the word out about this. I've already told a bunch of people about it, and I guess we are within almost a week, right? When it launches, is that right?
Yeah, we are. I've got my hard copies in, which was cool, and yeah, we're official next week.
Yeah, that's exciting. Well, I wish you all the best, and look forward to any future conversations with you. You know, I don't know if you get to Chicago very often, but I'm gonna follow you, and if I ever see any hint in Chicago, I know as an introvert you're not gonna invite me out to coffee, but I might just say, hey, Mark, if you're in town, man, let's get a cup of coffee. So
that'd be great. Actually, I'm out there. I'm supposed to be out there this Friday. I'm out there at least once a month. We've got a ton of clients out there. Everybody from AbbVie, McDonald's, Conagra. We're about to start with U.S. Food. So yeah, I'm out there a ton. So
that's awesome. That's awesome.
If we're in the same place, I'd love to grab a cup of coffee with you.
Well, it's a real pleasure talking with you, Mark. Thanks so much for your time, and congratulations on a great book.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate the opportunity.
See you, man. Bye.
Bye.
Yep, that was good.
We're joined by Marc Effron, author